You know the words. Every child does. Three blind mice, three blind mice. See how they run, see how they run. The syllables fall out of the mouth without effort, rounded by repetition, softened by memory. It is a tiny song that seems to belong to no one and to everyone at once, drifting through playgrounds and picture books, stitched into the fabric of early language itself. The melody loops, the rhyme clicks neatly into place, and before we are old enough to ask what it means, we have already absorbed it. It sounds harmless, almost playful. Three small creatures scampering, a farmer's wife, a kitchen knife, a little cartoon violence that passes as inconsequential. We imagine plump white mice and a comically cross woman in a starched apron. The sound of it is nursery lightness, short, repetitive, rhythmic. Yet when the echo finally fades, what remains is not movement, but mutilation, not running, but something done that cannot be undone. Blindness, tails severed, an act that separates a before from an after. Once you start listening to the words rather than the tune, a quiet unease begins. Why are children chanting a story of maiming? Why has everyone decided this is entertainment? The familiarity is not an accident. It is the disguise, because at the core of this rhyme is something older than the version you know. Something that has less to do with clumsy kitchen knives and more to do with how a culture talks about the limits of power, the finality of harm, and the helplessness of those who run in the wrong direction. To reach that core, you have to strip away the most comforting explanation of all. The story people like to tell now is tidy, almost satisfyingly so. They say the three blind mice are not mice at all, but men, three Protestant bishops in Tudor England, the so-called Oxford Martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, Thomas Cranmer. They say the farmer's wife is not a wife, but a queen, Mary Tudor, later called Bloody Mary, who had them burned for heresy in the mid-1550s. The blindness becomes their refusal, or their inability, to see the Catholic truth as Mary understood it. The cutting off of tails is reimagined as torture, mutilation, political vengeance, a violent reign reduced to a code smuggled into a lullaby, a subversive Protestant whisper against a Catholic queen. It is a compelling tale. It flatters the listener into feeling they have grasped a secret history, decoded a message hidden in plain sight. It turns an otherwise unsettling fragment into a moral drama, with identifiable heroes and a villain whose cruelty is safely contained in the past. It aligns the rhyme with national trauma, with martyrs and monarchs and the solemn burnings in Oxford. It makes the song feel as if it has a purpose. The evidence resists it. Mary's persecutions reach their grim peak in the mid-1550s. The first time we see anything recognizable as three blind mice on the page is roughly half a century later, in the year 1609, in a small music collection with the unwieldy title Deuteromelia, or the second part of music's melody, edited by Thomas Ravenscroft. The distance between the stake and the stave is long enough to trouble any straight line. More troubling still, the words in that early printing are not the words that power the modern theory. The 1609 version is a musical round, designed to be sung in overlapping voices, each part chasing the other in a weaving of sound. The text names a Dame Julian, a miller, and his merry old wife. There are mice, there is running, there is pursuit, but there is no farmer's wife, no mention of tails, and no knife. The most graphic images that anchor the Mary Tudor story appear only in the 19th century, when James Orchard Halliwell publishes a collection of nursery rhymes in the 1840s and gives us something much closer to the little chant we recognize now. Between Mary's pyres and Halliwell's printed page sprawls nearly 3 centuries of silence. If this was a piece of veiled political commentary about specific martyrs and a specific queen, the dates make that certainty impossible. This does not mean the rhyme has no politics. It means the clean, comforting allegory we are offered is retrofitted, a story built backwards, taking later, bloodier lines and grafting them onto an earlier, thinner stem. What matters is not whether the Mary theory is provable, but why such an explanation was needed at all. To understand the older, darker origin, we must step into the world in which Thomas Ravenscroft gathered and printed his song. Imagine England in the early 17th century, The air is thick with competing truths. The violence of the Reformation has not been forgotten. The smoke of burning heretics has barely cleared a generation before. Catholic, Protestant, conformist, recusant, these are not abstractions but badges that can cost you your property, your freedom, your life. The crown has changed heads, the official faith has shifted more than once, and ordinary people have learned to speak indirectly. In this climate, songs and rhymes are not innocent. They are tools, sometimes weapons, sometimes masks. Ravenscroft's Deuteramelia gathers, catches, rounds, and street tunes, snatches of melody carried in taverns and churchyards, sung by apprentices and scholars alike. The version of Three Blind Mice he prints is not a children's toy. It is a drinking house round, a communal knot of sound, sung by adults who live under authorities they cannot fully trust, and laws they may not fully obey. In the language of that time, blindness does not belong only to the body. To be blind can mean to be deceived, to persist in error, to be spiritually astray. In sermons and pamphlets, preachers of all stripes lament the blind who will not see their version of the light. The evidence suggests that the blindness of the three mice is at least as doctrinal as it is physical, a way of naming those who run heedless in their chosen error. And the mice themselves? Mice are vermin, gnawing at stored grain, undermining stability, consuming what others have labored to gather. To liken a group of people to mice is to strip them of dignity, to reduce them to a scurrying nuisance. It is the language of contempt. The earliest text does not lovingly sketch three little creatures with personalities. It throws out a shape, three blind mice, running together after some unattainable goal, chased and punished by figures of sturdier social standing, a Dame Julian, a miller, and his wife. Before it became a cozy tale, it looks like something else, a warning before it was a story, a way of speaking about those who stubbornly pursue the wrong course, and what happens when power finally catches them. Picture then a small room with low rafters somewhere in London around 1610. The floor is uneven, packed earth giving way to half-rotted boards. The air smells of sour ale and wet wool. Candles spit grease onto wall and table. Men sit shoulder to shoulder on benches scarred by knives and tankards. At the back, a boy with ink-stained fingers shifts uncomfortably on a stool. Beside him, an older man with a cleric's bearing holds his drink with careful restraint. Voices rise in ordinary talk, the price of grain, rumors from court, new taxes, a cousin arrested for saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. Somewhere near the hearth, someone begins to sing, not loudly, just enough to hook the nearest ear. Three blind mice. Another joins, then another, until the round curls through the room, each voice entering a beat after the last. Laughter follows, the kind that carries both amusement and edge. They know who the mice are meant to be. Perhaps they picture a faction they despise, or perhaps, quietly, those very authorities who hold their fate in their hands. Either way, the structure is the same, a small group, united in error, running together, unable or unwilling to see, moving inexorably towards harm. The song ends abruptly, as rounds do, voices trailing into uncertain silence. No one comments on the meaning. To explain the metaphor would be to admit too much. A tankard is set down. The boy on the stool asks, lightly, whether three blind mice can ever find their way back if the song is wrong about them. The older man does not answer. Some things, once sung, sit between speaker and listener as fact. The mice run, the pursuit follows, the cut is made. The room returns to its small, ordinary business, but the structure of the rhyme lingers. Action, chase, irreparable outcome. This pattern is not uniquely English. Across cultures, there are stories of those who fall, break, or are marked in ways that can never be undone. In some traditions, there are tales of jars once shattered that no magic can mend, of names once stained that no apology can cleanse. There are chants in other languages that warn of the stain of betrayal, the scar of shame, the fracture of oaths that, once snapped, echo down generations. What makes the English mice particular is not simply the violence suggested, but the smallness of the creatures chosen to carry it. Not kings or heroes, not giants or gods, but nameless, trembling animals whose only mistake is to run in the wrong direction with the wrong companions. The harshness of the lesson is brought down to the scale of vermin. The message is the same. Some errors erase the possibility of restoration, but in Three Blind Mice, that message is carried in the most fragile of bodies. Over the centuries, the rough adult edges of the song begin to dull. It slips from tavern to parlor, from parlor to nursery. Printed miscellanies and songbooks circulate. The original names blur. By the time Halliwell gathers it into his collection in the early 1840s, England is a different place again. Public executions are no longer sacramental spectacles, but uneasy remnants. Children's literature is blossoming into its own domain. There is profit to be made and comfort to be sold in giving the young their own world of words. The rhyme, then, begins to change. The obscure Dame Julian, the miller and his merry old wife melt away. In their place appears the farmer's wife, a figure of domestic authority, easier for child readers to recognize. The language tightens, the story clarifies. Where the earliest text was more oblique, the 19th century version leans into the image that will lodge in the mind. She cut off their tails with a carving knife. The violence, surprisingly, is sharpened, not softened. Yet, in the very act of reshaping it for children, the context is stripped off. The mice are no longer a veiled religious faction or a coded group of wrong believers. They become simply animals, naughty or foolish as any creature in a picture book. The blindness turns literal. The knife becomes a slapstick prop. The deeper horror drains away because the rhyme is no longer about the nature of error and the insolubility of punishment. It is now entertainment. The blood belongs to the page, to the illustration, to the theater of the bedtime shiver. By the early 20th century, the transformation is almost complete. In 1904, John W. Avamy publishes the complete version of Ye Three Blind Mice, an extended narrative that rewrites the whole structure. Now, the mice are blinded in a bush, their tails sliced off by a butcher's wife, but through a convenient cascade of events, they recover their sight, their tails somehow grow back, and they live happily ever after. What began as a bleak little knot of inevitability is forced into an arc of reassurance. The damage is undone. The story bends towards a cheerful resolution. The evidence suggests that this urge to heal the mice in later retellings is not just a kindness to children. It is a resistance to the original, more unsettling truth that some harms cannot be reversed. In Avamy's hands, the rhyme becomes a moral tale of resilience, of suffering overcome. But that is not what the earliest lines were built to say. Meanwhile, outside the nursery, the truncated fragment continues to work as a metaphor. In parliamentary debates and pamphlets, in sermons and satirical prints, the phrase "three blind mice" appears as a shorthand for foolish counselors, short-sighted ministers, cliques of men in power running together in error. Cartoonists draw corpulent politicians as mice, scurrying toward the edge of some financial or imperial catastrophe, their blindness a choice, not a sentence. Preachers invoke the image when warning congregations against following false teachers. The nursery rhyme structure proves too useful to remain confined to the cradle. This is not conspiracy, but cultural evolution. A line once used to mock or warn a particular group becomes a flexible tool, applied wherever a small cluster of the willfully mistaken seems to be heading toward a fall. The mice shift identities as needed. Sometimes they are radicals, sometimes they are reactionaries, sometimes they are the very authorities who once wielded the knife. What endures is the frame. Three together, eyes unseeing, motion without understanding. Against this shifting background, the seductive Mary Tudor story grows. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as people begin to look back with romantic fascination on Tudor bloodshed, it becomes fashionable to claim that almost every odd fragment of verse must hide a covert political allegory. Three Blind Mice is recruited to this parade. The theory insists that the mice can only be the Oxford martyrs, that the farmer's wife can only be Mary, that their fate at the stake must be cloaked in this childish veneer. Yet the dates argue otherwise. The goriest lines that make this reading irresistible do not appear until long after Mary is dead, after the fires have cooled, after the first printed version has already woven itself into popular song. The historical records of Mary's persecutions, meticulously kept, show no blinding, no cutting of extremities, no detail that would map neatly onto the rhyme's peculiar imagery. Scholars who have combed archives and pamphlets find rumors but no contemporaneous hint that this specific song was heard as an encoded history of those burnings. This was not hidden, it was overwritten. The Mary explanation does not emerge from the 16th century. It seeps from the 19th, when people needed to believe that even the strangest children's songs had a clear origin in national myth. the farmers, the wives, the martyrs, the queens. They are all later paint on an older, rougher surface. Underneath remains something simpler, and in its simplicity, more disturbing. Three beings, stripped of sight, moving together along a path they do not control. An authority figure, domestic or political, who responds not with guidance but with irrevocable harm. A world in which, once the knife falls, there is no mechanism for repair, no king's horses, no king's men, no divine intervention. Only the new shape of the damaged creature, and the fact that it must go on living in that shape. The rhyme endures because it speaks to more than one kind of blindness. There is the ignorance into which we are born, not yet knowing what will hurt us. There is the chosen blindness, when we run with those who comfort us, even as they lead us towards the blade. There is the institutional blindness, when those in power see only vermin where there are, in fact, lives. We hand three blind mice to children as if it were a toy because we have forgotten, or chosen to forget, what it quietly insists on, that no amount of effort, will, or regret can always remake what has been undone. Reputations once destroyed, trust once betrayed, bodies once broken, faith once lost. We may patch, we may heal, we may tell new stories that give the mice their sight back, their tails restored, their happy endings secured. But the original structure remains, buried beneath the revisions like an old foundation under a modern house. Three blind mice. Three blind mice. See how they run. See how they run. In the end, the rhyme is not just about vermin or martyrs or queens. It is about us,